Hello, everyone. This is Mel here from Sneakers Corner. Hello to Trinity, to Martin, Ellen, to DD, to Gent Z, and anyone else, Happy Camper, and to Murad, who I believe is watching. He may join us later, possibly, if he can. It's great to see so many of you here. Sorry, it's last minute, but like a lot of things, it's something grabs me, and I just go on air. So, we're looking at a website that I had a look at earlier this evening, and it amused me. It was called 30 Facts About Islam. And I thought it would be great to have a look at the so-called facts. Now, some of these turn out to be fairly straightforward facts, but there's a lot of doubtful facts, in inverted commas, included in these lists. And I think that these are easily debunked. And the comment by Trinity Matrix is very good. Without lies, Islam dies. Exactly. Hello to Tony Holly. Okay, so without further ado, let's get straight in and we'll have a look at this website now. Just hopefully it all works according to plan here. No, wrong one. Sorry. Okay, let's just check that this works okay. Great, okay. Right, so we start fact number one. The meaning of Islam. Islam means surrender or submission. Salam, which means peace, is the root word of Islam. In a religious context, the word Islam means the surrendering of one's will without compulsion to the true will of God in an effort to achieve peace. So any thoughts on that there, people? I don't think I have a major issue with the idea that Islam means surrender, though there is a question about, was this the original meaning at the beginning? The meaning seems to have changed over time. The bit that I find a little bit dodgy, I don't know if people can see that well enough. What I might do is maybe just change things so that we're just seeing the post by itself. Let's just see if that makes a difference there. Is that a bit better? Just see if that's... Just go to full screen on it, so hopefully that will improve things so you can read it a bit better. The bit that I found was a bit of a contradiction is it says, Islam means the surrendering of one's will without compulsion to the true will of God. I think there's a kind of a contradiction there. If you are giving up one's will to another being, how is that not compulsion? If you are essentially handing over your will to someone else, maybe at the outset it's voluntary, but essentially if you're handing over your will, you're being compelled in some way. I think once the initial handing over of your will, from that moment onwards, that other being, whether it be God or be another human being, is compelling you to do everything. Okay. There's a bit of a psychological issue with that. I have a problem with that. I'm sure we can think of lots of situations in life where that would be easily seen as compulsion. Okay, so let's just take one example. Let's say a woman marries a man, and as part of the marriage, she agrees to obey her husband. Okay. Now, what happens if he asks her to do things which she doesn't want to do? No, he says, you've surrendered your will, you must do everything that I order you to, no matter how crazy. Even if I'm asking you to believe in things which goes against common sense. That to me sounds like compulsion. So I think that's all I will say on that one. That's number one. We won't spend too much time on each one. We'll try and get through them fairly quickly. The meaning of Muslim. Muslim means anyone or anything. So they're getting it really broad here. that surrenders itself to the true will of God. By this definition, everything in nature, trees, animals, planets, etc., are Muslims because they are in a state of surrender to God's will. In other words, they are fulfilling the purpose for which God created them. So, everything in nature is fulfilling the purpose for which God created them. Now, there's the idea of permissive will in relation to God, which is sometimes things are allowed to happen, but it isn't something that God positively wills. There's a big distinction between those two ideas. So, an example, a positive will of God would be that everyone is happy. Okay, all being equal. Permissive will would be God allows evil things to occur. It's not that God wants these things to occur. So there's no distinction made between those two concepts here. They are fulfilling the purpose for which God created them. So anything or anyone, it says, could be a Muslim. Okay? So you don't need to do anything. So it'd be interesting to see, as we look at the definition of Muslim in practice later on in this PowerPoint or this, website, whether the person is actually consistent with this. So if this is a fact that anyone or anything is a Muslim, well, let's just see if that's if that's actually the case. Okay. So we go on to fact number 3: Islam, a civilization. Islam is not a new religion or cult. Okay. It is a universal way of life and civilization. Studies show that between 1.5 and 1.8 billion people in the world identify their religion as Islam. It's questionable that, because I think in many of these studies they are simply totaling all the populations in the Middle East and North Africa and coming up with that figure. In Iran, like 52% of young people have said they've abandoned Islam. So I wonder how accurate these figures are. So that's one issue. Along with Judaism and Christianity, it traces its root through Prophet Abraham and back to the first humans, Adam and Eve. I could start a religion tomorrow and claim that I trace its root all the way back to Abraham. There's no proof for any of that. Where's the evidence? There's no evidence for that. In terms of the opening line, it is not a new religion. Well, Islam says that Muhammad started it, so by that definition, it's a new religion at least from the 7th century. It's ambiguous. It wants to have it both ways. Islam was supposed to be founded by Muhammad, and yet it wants to claim that it really was there all along. So which is it? Contradiction there. It says it's not a cult. I think it's got lots of aspects which sound like a cult to me. I don't know, do any of you feel like that? If you are brainwashed, that suggests a cult. Death for leaving a religion, that sounds very much like a cult. The fact that it's got 1.5 or 1.8 billion people belonging to it doesn't take away from the fact that it's got cultic qualities to it. I see Murray has said in Iran, you could say 80% of the youth abandoned Islam. Martin says certified cult. Jen says 100% cult. You know, how does Islam treat women? There's a lot of evidence to suggest very badly. So again, that doesn't sound like a religion that's particularly nice. How does Islam treat non-Muslims in Muslim countries? Again, all of these things, if you think about it and look at the evidence, would suggest a cult. Islam as a civilization, I think that's disputable as well. I would argue that the Middle East was and North Africa was far more civilized prior to Islam than after Islam. Syria, for example, had one of the largest collections of books in the world, and I think that's true for other parts of the Middle East and North Africa. An awful lot of learning was lost. Thank you, John Alexander. You guys are really on a roll, enjoying the vids. Thanks very much. I like Veronica's comment. If they kill you, if you want to leave, that's a cult. I agree there. RJ says, first one has to know who the father of Kitem is. Abdullah was used for a name of an unknown father. The tree goes back to Adnan with Urs or Lies. Ibn Kathir, 30 generations missing to Abraham. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, Holy Armor says all the Islamic science are really Persian science, astronomy, etc. Yeah, there's an awful lot that was just simply taken over. The Christians were used to administer the empire because they didn't have enough gifted people among the Muslims, and this was true for centuries. The fact that until recent times there was a sky-high illiteracy issue across the Middle East and North Africa also would go against the idea that Islam is a civilization. I'm not going to discount some aspects of Islam which brought certain cultural benefits, but to say it is a fact that it had a civilizing effect overall, I think that's disputable. I think we could easily point to many pagan religions that brought about a better culture. Just the mere fact that we don't complain about hundreds and hundreds of other religions around the world which are, for example, pagan, but don't cause any trouble for anybody, very peaceful, mind their own business, don't hurt anyone, don't blow up planes, etc. So it's arguable whether Islam is particularly civilizing. Okay, so that's that one. Next one, this is where it gets a bit interesting. Basic practices in Islam. There are 5 pillars of practice in Islam. Now, notice this bit. These practices must be undertaken with the best effort in order to be considered a true Muslim. Notice that. Declaration of faith, a statement proclaiming the belief in one God and that Muhammad is a prophet of God. To become Muslim, a person simply recites this statement publicly and in Arabic. Hold on a second. I thought it said anyone and anything is Muslim. Wasn't that what we saw earlier on? Now, all of a sudden, elsewhere, there's a different definition of Muslim. Instead of everyone being a Muslim, and a tree or a table or a jumper or football and anything being a Muslim, here now there's a prerequisite to become a Muslim. So that would indicate that you weren't a Muslim before now, and to become a Muslim you have to do this. So that's a contradiction. Massive problem with that one. Formal prayer 5 times a day. Okay, that seems factual enough. Poor Jew tax 2.5% of one's excess wealth given to the needy once a year. Well, it's given to the mosques. Whether all of it goes to the needy is another question. There seems to be a lot of it filtering to other unsavory groups, but we'll leave that aside. Fasting during the daylight hours in the month of Ramadan. Is that true everywhere? Hello to Saint Murad, who's just joined us. What about in Sweden? What do the Muslims do in Sweden? So there's an issue. Pilgrimage to Mecca at least once, if physically and financially able. Okay, so how about we focus in on that one for a moment? Pilgrimage to Mecca at least once to be a true Muslim. So how many would be a true Muslim among all these millions and millions of Muslims if that were the case? So I'm just going to come out of here for a second. I'm going to share a slide that I have. Okay. Okay. Right. So only true Muslims go on Hajj. So one of the requirements to be a true Muslim is you go on Hajj at least once in a lifetime. I noticed that Murad has made a comment before we go into this. Let me just read that. Giving to the needy. No, the sheikhs put most of it in their pockets. I've seen that. Wow. So you're not suggesting Islam is a bit of a scam, are you, Murad? Yeah, so that's another issue. I bet you there's a lot of that going on. Okay, so there's a lot of ifs and buts here. So take it with a pinch of salt here. But if we accept that there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, okay, which is doubtful, probably a lot less, and that Islam has a net increase currently of 2.9% according to a Pew study. The trend is obviously downwards, as we've pointed out earlier. The net gain is 52.2 million new Muslims each year, okay, who need to go on Hajj. Okay, now forget the point that most of these, in fact, all of them, let's just say for argument's sake that most of them are born, but let's just assume that they are of an age to go on Hajj. Okay, now the reason I'm saying this is because we're doing averages here overall, and we're trying to see do all of them go on Hajj over the course of their lifetime. So we give them a ticket this year. Okay, so these are the new Muslims, 52.2 million, whether they're converted or they just were born, and we discount those who have died in a particular year. So these are the net additions, and they filled. What did I mean to say? Forget about they fill the Hajj. They go to the Hajj. This would be on average just 2.2 million. So if the maximum number from that group of 52.2 million go on Hajj, it would be 2.2 million. That's the point I was trying to say, and I made a mistake in my PowerPoint and didn't spot it in time. Okay, so 2.2 million go on Hajj this year from the 52.2 million. So that's on average is about 2.2 million, give or take. Sometimes it's 3 million some years, but we won't haggle for the sake of a few thousand. 2.2 million. So don't worry, the 50 million who didn't go can go next year, right? So next year, another 53 to 54 million, because obviously it's going up 2.9% each year. So 53 to 54 million new Muslims are added, okay? And about 2.2 million Muslims go on Hajj, okay? So what happens then? You can see that of that extra bunch, only a tiny percentage of them, 2.2 million, go on Hajj. But don't worry, there's always next year, inshallah, for the 101 million Muslims who still haven't gone. Do you see that the issue? So we're just looking at the fact that there's only a small number of Muslims going on Hajj. Now, we're talking about Hajj here, not Umrah, okay? Because it's the Hajj that counts in terms of the 5 pillars. Umrah is fine, but it's not the Hajj. So if we do the numbers, that means that in reality, only 4.2% of Muslims ever go on Hajj. If you go through all the numbers, that's what it averages out. Yeah. Now, do you remember we said that, not me, the website said that true Muslims are the ones who do the 5 pillars, and one of those is going to the Hajj at least once in their lifetime. That would mean if only 4.2% of Muslims ever go on Hajj, that means 95.8% of Muslims are not true Muslims. So the vast majority are not true Muslims. This is not me. This is the 30 facts about Islam says that these are the true Muslims, the ones that go on Hajj. So 95.8% are not true Muslims. So the question is, so do only true Muslims go to heaven then? If that's the case, we got a major problem. All of these people doing all these practices, if they're not true Muslims at the end of the day because they haven't gone on Hajj, where do they stand with everything? Do they get put outside the pearly gates because of that? And RJ says there's a limited time each year that one can go on Hajj. It's for 5 days each year. So, yeah. I see Banu Pong says it's 2 a.m. in Thailand already. So may I go to bed? And I will watch this later again tomorrow. Thank you for your dedication. You're You're more than free. This is not Islam. I cannot compel you to stay. You're free to leave at any stage. John Alexander has an interesting comment. I think of all those people crowding into that square, circling the Kaaba, running with the bulls in Spain. It's very similar, isn't it? Probably running with the bulls is probably not half as dangerous if you think of the numbers of people who get crushed each year. Okay, so let's go back to the site then. Apologies. Okay, so those are the basic practices. So I would argue that there are flaws there in those facts, so-called facts. Basic beliefs in Islam. There are 6 articles of faith in Islam. These are the basic beliefs that one must have in order to be considered a true Muslim. That phrase again, a true Muslim. They are belief in the one God. Okay, just on that one, Lloyd de Jong has found an awful lot of evidence of the deification of Muhammad all through the centuries, and that is found in the Sirah, and there's about 56 different Sirahs, and he's found really strong evidence to suggest that they are deifying him, which goes totally against this idea of one God. And the Sharia also suggests that they are treating Muhammad as a god as well. It's also another part B, all of the true prophets of God. So that's another belief. True prophets of God gnosis. It's kind of a misnomer in a way, or not a misnomer. It's kind of what's the word for it? A prophet ought to be someone who tells the truth. So it's kind of embedded in the word prophet that the prophet should be true. They're either a prophet or not. But that's maybe a small little thing I would say on that one. C, the original scriptures revealed to Moses, David, Jesus, and Muhammad. So, okay, so they believe in the original scriptures revealed to Moses, David, Jesus, and Muhammad. So the Torah and the Gospels. Now, Islam would argue that we don't have the original scriptures, okay, that it's been lost, and all we have are corrupted versions. So how can you believe in something that isn't there? So all you have is an imaginary set of scriptures that you supposedly believe in that doesn't exist. So no one can disprove what you believe in. So if you say you believe in the Torah, or what about this Torah that exists today? No, the original one, we believe in that. Okay, what's in that? Well, you could say anything you like there for that one. So this is the slippery sort of game that Islam plays. I see St. Murad says, my future crackdown of the one God will show it is a hoax. Argument from silence. It certainly is Protestant believer. Okay, so a lot of problems with C there. D, they believe in the angels. Okay. What about the jinn? What exactly are the jinn? They believe in jinn, don't they? And then there's the jinn don't sound particularly good to me. They do mischievous things, sound a bit like demons. You could add that they believe in demons, perhaps, or at least superstition, and so on forth. E, the day of judgment and the hereafter. Okay, so they believe in no issue with that. That's straight out of Christianity and Judaism. They believe in destiny. Okay, so essentially that's the idea that things are going to happen regardless of free will. In fact, it's kind of saying that don't believe in free will as I understand it. So whatever you choose was destined to happen. Any thoughts on any of these? RJ says, blasphemy of Muhammad can result in death even if one repents, but blasphemy of Allah doesn't result in death if one repents. So there's an interesting point. what is the God in Islam if that's the case? Muhammad seems to be consistently placed on a higher level to Allah. Okay, this next one, another fact of Islam, is Allah's a different God, ? Muslims believe in the one creator of the universe, referring to him as Allah, which is the Arabic word for God. Now, there is dispute on that. Some say that it stands for the La, Allah, but perhaps enough time has passed before the beginning of Islam to justify a reference to that etymology. It seemed to have been used by Christians, so I think that maybe put aside. But Muslims worldwide, even English-speaking Muslims, frequently use the Arabic word Allah because Arabic is the language of the Quran. But Allah is no different than the God of Abraham. Is that true? Allah is no different from the God of Abraham, the God of Moses. So would you say that the teaching in the Torah matches up with what's found in the Quran? I don't think so. There's some common elements, but I wouldn't say it agrees perfectly. And what about the God of Jesus? Do you think that is the same? I would argue that the New Testament strongly indicates a belief in the Trinity, and that is not the same as the God of Islam. The Creator is the Creator regardless of what people call him. In the English language, he is most commonly referred to as God, yet Jesus spoke a different language referring to God as Eloi. Are God and Eloi different gods? Okay, we're not really worried too much about the names that we apply to God. I personally am not. I don't think that's a major issue. It would logically follow then that the people who refer to God as Allah in the Arabic language are referring to the very same God. Now that's disputable because the definition that you bring to the word God in a particular context could change the meaning. So it's contextualized by what you say about the God that you call God. So, like for example, if I say God, I may be referring to the God of rock and roll, which could be something completely different to the Christian God, for example. In fact, many Arab Jews and Arab Christians call God Allah, and the word Allah is written in Arabic script on the walls of many Arab churches, on the pages of Arabic Bibles. I think the point was made plenty of times already there. But so while the understanding of God may differ between faith groups, the various names used to describe him does not change the fact that the one creator of the universe is the God of all people. Do you see the problem? Up here it says Allah isn't different between the God of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. It's the same Allah. It's no different. Yet down here it says the understanding of God may differ between different faith groups. Does anyone see a contradiction there? What are they on about? Now you could argue that the God that really exists. If you accept the God exists, the God that really exists, that's the same. There's only one God there, But what's crucial is actually what we understand about God. And that's the whole point of religion. Religion teaches something about God. It's trying to suggest that Christianity and Judaism teaches the same thing about God as Islam, and it simply is factually incorrect. We are teaching different ideas about God. I like Protestant Believer's point, a huge Quran prediction. I love that. Yeah. Another bit of interesting phenomena is a highly exalted Allah AWOL God. Yeah. Absent without leave. Yeah, I like the other one. Show me your God's laws and I'll show you your God. And also, RJ has another point which is very good. Look at the physical description of Allah and the belief of Muslims that he is not a spirit. That's a major difference. The shin of Allah and all the rest of it, the two right hands of Allah, and what's that about? So there's a lot of problems there. Okay, so that's that one. I think that's pretty much debunked. There's quite a few that's been debunked already. I've only delved into a few at this stage. I don't know if we're going to get through all 30. Well, we'll see how we get on here. But the Islamic concept of God, is that he's loving, merciful, compassionate. Any thoughts on that one? Would you agree that is this the picture you get when you read the Quran? Islam also teaches that he's all-knowing and the perfect judge of affairs and will punish or forgive accordingly. However, Allah once said to Muhammad, "My mercy prevails over my wrath." Is that right? So Islam teaches a balance between fear and hope, protecting one from both complacency and despair. Yeah, I see. Veronica says Islam is in nearly every aspect a counterfeit version of Christianity. Well, thank you very much. 321, love walking the talk. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Yeah, Saint Murad brought up an interesting point there, is the Quran has no word of love. That's true. So even though it says here that God is that he's loving, I think if you were to open up the average paragraph or page in the Bible, I think you'll find plenty of references to God being loving, but you're not going to find that in the Quran. Protestant Believers says, "We will cast terror into the hearts of those who became disbelievers because they partner other gods." So that's does that fit with the idea of God being loving, merciful, and compassionate? Their abode is the fire, and evil is the place of the unjust. So lots of examples. Allah is not just. You can't have it both ways unless Jesus died for your sins. Okay. So I think a lot of you there would suggest there's a contradiction there. I don't find much evidence for the idea of God being loving in the Quran. I think the opposite is true, and seems to be a tyrant, seems to be malicious, creating people on purpose, knowing that their fate is hell and things like that. So doesn't seem to be very merciful there. Who is God according to Islam? Muslims believe that God has revealed 99 of his names or attributes in the Quran. It is through these names that one can come to know the Creator. A few of these names are the All-Merciful, the All-Knower, the Protector, the Provider, the Near, the First, the Last, the Hidden, and the Source of all peace. Any thoughts on that? And the best of deceivers, I see. Okay, so I think one problem that stands out for me here is one of the attributes of God is first and last. And in the Bible, it's clear as day, Jesus describes himself as the first and the last. So therefore, according to this, if you accept the Bible came before the Quran, which it did, Jesus is God, according to Islam. Who knew? So that's an issue. The other thing I suppose you could say is, are these attributes, are they eternal? Are they, if they are eternal, they're divine, aren't they? Are they distinct from God, or are they all the same? You know, how does that fit in with the idea of there being one God? There seems to be a fragmentary idea there in that concept of God having 99 attributes. I'd be open to hearing what Muslims have to say about that. I think there's an argument philosophically that this opens up a can of worms in relation to the idea of God, but it's perhaps just a philosophical issue that requires further explanation, perhaps, if I'm being generous. But it is certainly a philosophical problem. Okay, so let's move on. Next part, accountability in Islam. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. The Christian concept of vicarious atonement, the idea that Jesus died for the sins of humanity, is alien to the Islamic concept of personal responsibility. Okay, straight off, who does Islam say died on the cross? Does it say Jesus? No, it says someone else took his place. Does that sound like vicarious atonement there? So there's a flaw. Islam teaches that on the day of judgment, every person will be resurrected and will be accountable to God for their every word and deed. Consequently, a practicing Muslim is always striving to be righteous while hoping and praying for God's acceptance and grace. Now, accountability in Islam is questionable as well here, because, okay, let's say a Muslim man sees a woman and has lustful thoughts about her, okay? Where's the accountability there? Does he take ownership of that, or does what happen is that she is blamed for the feelings that he has because of how she's dressed or whatever? I would suggest that there is no accountability there. Instead, someone else is blamed for the person's own failings. That doesn't sound like the sort of accountability that I would consider mature. I don't see ownership there. I see deflection. And Christianity teaches that it's the person themselves who has the feelings who is accountable. So actually, I don't think Islam is all that accountable. If you can think of probably many other examples of where it's someone else's fault for the feelings that a person has. Now, there's an interesting point there from Leif O'Reilly, if I pronounced your name correctly. Before creation, to whom could Allah have been merciful? Does Allah require creation to realize his attributes? Very good point. Yeah. Now, prophets of Islam. Okay, Muslims believe in all of the true prophets that preceded Muhammad, from Adam to Jesus. Okay, let's start with that first before we move on. So Adam was a prophet, was he? Okay, how was he a prophet exactly? And who was he a prophet to? If he's the only person, first of all, on the earth, was he a prophet then? And who was he giving a prophetic message to? Did he give a prophetic message to Eve, and did she actually listen? Both of them were sinners. Sure. How exactly is he a prophet in that context? And the fact is, do we have any words from Adam? Do we have a record of what he said? No, we don't have anything. So in what sense is he a prophet? So that's a major problem. And there's lots of other people who exist in the Old Testament that Christians or Jews don't consider to be prophets, but they are Old Testament figures. For example, David is not considered to be a prophet. He's a king of Israel. He's got, he's like a precursor in a sense to the Messiah, but he is a very flawed individual. Is David prophetic when he commits adultery? I don't think so. Saint Murad says no, Muslims have two counterfeit prophets, Hud and Salah. Very good. Does Islam have an answer to the question, why was crucifixion faked? Eve, we will be kicked out here. Yeah. Lost Solomon. Yeah. So a few ones that we could point to there. It's very dodgy. Muslims believe they brought the same message of voluntarily surrendering to God's will. But here's the problems, just before going to any further. They believe in fate, okay? So how does fate, destiny, fit in with voluntarily surrendering? If you were bound by fate to surrender your will, how is that voluntary? That's an issue. So the same message of voluntary surrendering to God's will to different peoples at different times. Muslims also believe they were Muslims, again, in a generic sense. Oh, now they have a distinction. since they followed God's true guidance and surrendered their will to him. So do you notice they're playing around with words? So sometimes it's a generic sense Muslim, and other times it's specific. So the word becomes utterly meaningless then. Okay. Gordon says David was prophetic when he prophesied the Messiah and his death in Psalm 22. Okay, that's a fair point. Okay. Yaha is John the Baptist, Mandaean influences. Okay. Right, on to the next one. Who Muslims worship? Muslims neither worship Muhammad nor pray through him. Muslims worship the unseen, omniscient creator Allah. Now, you may have seen in an earlier video, there was a record from, I think it was the 13th or 14th century of what Muslims did when they visited the grave of Muhammad. This was in Medina, and they have a tradition of praying to Muhammad to ask for intercession from Allah. So there's a contradiction there, and that is a fact. You can't change the past. John Alexander, it's like listening to someone sell you a bunch of empty lip service. Veronica says that is a lie. They can call on Mo daily. There's an interesting one from Aquarian Riddle. The creed induces a serious mental health crisis in them when you point out that their deity misguides people but is then angry with them. Can you imagine if you said to someone, put your hand on the fire, and then they get burned, and then you get angry with them? Why did you do that? Because you told me. So, yeah. And then there's the Muhammad statue. Now, we saw that in the Dome of the Rock. The Crusaders said that they saw a golden statue of Muhammad. Also, in the Song of Roland, they talk about Mohammedans carrying around with them statues of Muhammad that they prayed to and carried up on high and so on. So there's a big history there that's been covered over. John Alexander, we as Muslims must love Jesus. So John Alexander, you're a Muslim, are you? It's interesting you've got a name like John Alexander. It sounds like you're trying to pretend to be a Westerner, a non-Muslim, if I may be honest with you. And all the prophets, what does that mean? Oh, so maybe you're not. Sorry, maybe I misinterpreted you there. We as Muslims must love Jesus and all the prophets. What does that mean? Okay, sorry about that. I think I mistook you as a Muslim there for a second. Yep, they pray to the prophet. And Protestant Believer says, yep, Muhammad's name is all over the dome. Okay, let's go back to this. So I think that fact supposedly is very questionable. I would say it's easily debunked if you look at the history of Islam. There is copious evidence for Muslims worshipping Muhammad. They pray to him. They have painted images of him down through the centuries. They even have him radiant with light, unlike ordinary human beings. They basically deify him. I think there's very hard to avoid that conclusion. Okay, God's revelations. Muslims accept the original unaltered Torah as revealed to Moses and the original unaltered Bible as revealed to Jesus, neither of which they claim exists now. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Since they were revealed by God. But none of these scriptures exist today in their original form or in their entirety. Isn't that convenient? Therefore, Muslims follow the subsequent, final, and preserved revelation of God, the Quran. Okay, so here's the problem. Okay, do you see the double standard? Okay, I think it's fair to say that both Jews and Christians accept that over 2 millennia, little bits and pieces have changed in the Bible whether the Old Testament or the New Testament. And that's because of things like, if you think of the thousands and thousands of changes, the majority of them are, of these thousands and thousands of changes are to do with things like punctuation, where texts that originally didn't have punctuation had punctuation added to it and so forth. There are passages which seem to not exist in earlier manuscripts, but we can specify which those are. I'm sorry, John Alexander, I'm a Christian brother. I was just repeating the Dawa PR script. No problem. Sorry about that, John. My mistake. Where was I? I've lost my train of thought. So the point is, the majority of the alterations that we see happening over the centuries are minor things like spelling alterations, punctuation errors, and then there are a few more significant changes. But in Bibles, you see critical additions where it says, say, for example, in Mark's Gospel, it will say this ending isn't found in some early manuscripts. So there's red flags given within the Bible of alterations. But notice that the same Muslim writer hasn't recognized that the same thing is going on with the Quran. And just reading from Veronica here, which makes the point really well. According to J. Smith, they have already found more than 90,000 differences in the Arabic Quran versions which are available today. And just add to that, there are 35, 36, 37 plus Arabic Qurans, each different from each other with thousands of differences. So I think they need to be honest and say, right, if you're saying that the Bible is not original and that it has been altered, you have to apply the same standard to the Quran. It's exactly the same process of minor changes by and large that have occurred. So you kind of have to be fair. If you see and recognize that there are alterations, with thousands of these minor alterations in the Bible, you have to admit that there are minor alterations also to the Quran, and they exist. We can see them in terms of the Arabic Qurans that exist today, and also if we compare any version of the Quran today with some of the earliest manuscripts, we can see a drift in the text. Okay. This is not to say that it's completely different. It's substantially the same as the earliest version that we have in terms of the Quran, but changes have happened. And the other thing, I suppose, is Muslims follow the subsequent final revelation of God. The final. When did it become final? Because it went through various changes. We could talk about the Hafs Quran become the official Quran, Arabic Quran, in the 1920s, and then I think there was a further what's the word for it? Attempt to make it official universally in 1985 as well. So it's constantly being updated, or the idea of it being final seems to be shifting forwards in time all the time. Okay, so that's God's revelations. Now, the other thing, the idea that this text comes from God is disputable. There are many people now pointing out that the sources of the Quran are not divine, but are just simply from human sources. So if you look at the work of Thomas Alexander on J. Smith's channel, he can point to hundreds and hundreds of sources. We think of Odin's work, again, same thing. We can actually pinpoint lots of different sources. Paul Ellis again has pointed out these, and many other scholars have done the same. Now, what's interesting is I was talking to Jay on the phone the other day, and he knows a scholar, and there's a plan to actually create a book with all of these sources all in one book. And when that is created, that's going to be quite a book to have, and this will completely shoot this argument in the foot, let's say. Aquarian Riddle says they are forbidden to criticize or question anything under their form of Jurisprudence, check out Reliance of the Traveller, the most popular authority on Sharia. Okay, so let's move on. Origin of the Quran. The Quran was not authored by Muhammad. I think it wasn't Leo III in the early part of the 8th century who said that Muhammad was one of the authors of the Quran. It was authored by God, according to this guy, revealed to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel and written into physical form by his companions. There's so much faulty with that. Where to begin? So the evidence is that there were multiple authors. The Quran went through various editorial stages, and this is to be found in the work of Luling. So there's a lot disputable about that. Another red herring argument from silence there, Protestant believer. I wonder, is it in relation to what I've just said? Okay, so I think there's no evidence for this. It's authored by God. I think there were various sources that were put together, and we're not even sure when the final, substantially final version of the Quran came into existence. Was it late 7th century? Was it the 8th century? And then, all the other bits and pieces that were added over the centuries. So if we compare the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, some of them appear to be from the Quran, some of them seem to be something else. What about the bits that are not in the Quran? Does that mean those bits were dropped out of the Quran? Or did the Quran borrow bits from the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock? Do you see where that's going as well? So there's lots of problems with this. I think there's plenty of scholarship now that would say that we can point to a human origin to the Quran. There are a lot of studies done which suggest that there were multiple authors and that there are different parts of the Quran that come from vastly different periods in time. So does it come from Gabriel? Does it come from Allah? I would suggest that the substantial body of evidence would suggest no. Original Arabic text of the Quran. The original Arabic text of the Quran contains no flaws or contradictions and has not been altered since its revelation. Okay, what about it's not been altered since its revelation? I think we have got abundance of evidence against that. We only have to open up any of the Arabic versions of the Quran to show that it has been altered. In terms of contradictions, I think people like Christian Prince has pointed out the multiple contradictions in the Quran and he has pointed this out on a daily basis. Are there flaws in terms of the Arabic? I would suggest there are. Perhaps, Murad, if you want to drop in any flaws that you're aware of. I think the spelling of Abraham itself differs in the Quran. So sometimes they use Ibrahim, sometimes Abraham. So different spellings there. Of course, the earliest versions don't have the diacritical marks. And so it's disputable if they've put the right diacritical marks in. Mike Hike thinks there are no differences across the Qurans that we exist today. I think you're just in denial. Saint Murad says lots of grammatical errors in the Quran. Okay. Isa isn't even close to Yeshua. Yeah. So there's tons we could talk about. I could spend all night here talking about all the flaws. Thank you very much. Again, 321. That's very kind of you. Veronica says, why don't you put halves and wash side by side and check it for yourself? Yeah. The thing is, that work has already been done, and it's clear that there are differences between the two. So Mike Hike, really face up to reality. Your empty arguments don't work, I'm afraid. Letter for letter and dot by dot. Absolutely deluded you are. Ancient Qurans, okay. Actual 7th century Qurans, complete and intact, are on display in museums in Turkey and other places around the world. Okay, let's have a look and let's check that out. Let me just see if this comes up. I'll just wait for the screen to change. No, it doesn't look like it's going to do it. Okay, let me just go back. I'll stop sharing and come out of this for a second. Okay, a second. Okay. Right. So, is there a Quran intact from the 7th century? So 100% intact from the 7th century. Let's have a look at that. Now, so hopefully it's coming up. Hopefully, I'll just wait a second. It seems to be a delay there. Okay, so according to a source that I've looked at, like the Samarkand Kufic Quran, the Topkapi manuscript was often cited as the oldest Quran for many years. Recent research, however, shows that the Topkapi manuscript is at least a century younger than the oldest existing Quran fragments. Do you see the problem? The Topkapi manuscript has been dated to about the early to mid 8th century and is a nearly complete text of the Quran. So it's not from the 7th century, and it's not a complete text of the Quran, even if we accept it's a near complete, but it's not. In that respect, it is most likely the oldest near complete Quran in existence. It says also, like the Samarkand Quran, the Topkapi manuscript is believed to be an original Quran commissioned by the 3rd Caliph Uthman in 651. Research has shown that this is not true and that the manuscript is over a century younger than Uthman's Qurans. So that's another lie or falsehood that is presented as truth by the that website. Let's go back to you again. Now, let me just have a look. Benta J says, too bad, even, let me just, I've lost it there. It's a bit hard to read it because it's racing ahead. Thank you to Peter Fall Muhammad for your kind gifts, sir. Much appreciated. Yeah, so where are the Uthman Qurans? Mike Hike says, how do you know about Hafs and Warsh and differences in pronunciation? From our books and sources, you are not even representing what we accept as Quran. Well, Mike Hike, the people have actually compared them side by side using the actual Hafs and Warsh manuscripts. Jay and others have appeared at Speaker's Corner and shown photocopies of these actual books. They even have held up these manuscripts, what we have of them today, and we can see the differences. Okay, and Arabic scholars have actually looked at these. So I think you're just in denial, to be honest with you. I don't think that is of any value. You need evidence. So the ancient Qurans, that whole point is inaccurate. They're not complete. They typically are from the 8th century. We've only got fragments from the 7th century. They're not intact. So not much good there. Quran preserved revelation. So this is kind of related to if all the Qurans in the world today were destroyed, the original Arabic would still remain. Is that true? This is because millions of Muslims called Hafiz or guardians have memorized the text letter for letter from beginning to end, every word and every syllable. In which version? Hafs? Warsh? You tell me that they've all memorized these the same? And when you compare some of the words, you can see that it isn't, the differences aren't based on an oral memory that's being confused. It's a written difference that has occurred. So that's just nonsense. I think the argument that there was a time in the early part of Islamic history where the early versions of the Quran were memorized is just nonsense. This didn't happen. And all of the different variants that exist is evidence for that. It says also chapters from the Quran are precisely recited from memory in each of the 5 formal prayers performed daily by hundreds of millions of Muslims throughout the world. But the question is, which version are they using? Okay, most of them are using the Hafs. The Hafs isn't even the earliest version of the Quran, and the Warsh is very different. There's lots of different versions that we've mentioned. So I think this is a weak argument, and we have all the evidence that if we take any of the versions, we can see variations going on over history, over time, and between the different readings. So I think that is a flawed argument. Sharia law. Okay, so that's the next one we're going to look at. Just try and keep up with the chat here if we can. So Veronica makes a good point. Neither revelation nor preserved. This Quran fragments are jotter of the serial Aramaic preacher. Let me see. I see a point there. This is okay. All too many Muslims are shocked and surprised to find what's in their tradition. Their sources scandalize them. RJ says Hafs was considered a liar, plagiarist, thief, etc. by al-Bukhari and others, so they chose Hafs as their standard. Great choice. So I wouldn't be relying on Hafs if you want a preserved Quran of all the people ever. What a choice. Okay, Sharia law. Sharia is the law that regulates the daily life of Muslim and serves as a guide for living by Islamic principles. As Islam is not only a belief system but a complete way of life, the law covers all aspects of living, including moral, spiritual, intellectual, physical, economical, political, etc. Sharia law is derived by scholars through interpretations of Islam's canonical texts, the Quran and Hadith sayings, and so on. As with any legal system, the interpretations can range across the liberal conservative spectrum, and opinions on the meanings and applications will often differ. Therefore, Sharia law is essentially an effort to comprehend God's instructions. I thought God's instructions were simple and clear to begin with, but anyway, and apply them in daily life. Since the interpretations are made by humans, they are subject to error and even perversion. This occurs when unqualified, ignorant, and/or corrupted individuals make the interpretation. Okay, let me just go down. While there's no pope in Islam to serve as the authoritative interpreter, there are recognized institutions of scholars whom analyze, discuss, deliberate, and arrive at reasonable rulings through a process known as fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence. This nuanced and sophisticated science operates on the premise that the Islamic texts are fluid, the shura, and dynamic, that anything outside of the very basic tenets can and should be interpreted according to the particular time, place, and culture. Okay, so if any version of Sharia advocates brutality, injustice, extremism, etc., the question must be asked, are such rulings endorsed by mainstream Islamic scholars, or are they being posited by those devoid of a true understanding of the religion or the wisdom to apply it? It seems like this is all very subjective. So you have all of these groups that kind of have an idea of what the truth is, and then these can be overturned by other people. So you could really pick whichever school you want if you want to follow it. I don't know. I don't think doesn't sound very authoritative when you have got different schools. All this concept of Sharia came in very late as well. It wasn't there in the 7th century. And I'm sure Lloyd could probably add a lot more points on this. Okay, let's move on. So in terms of all of this, okay, I don't see any major This is meant to be a fact about Islam. I don't see how Sharia law is particularly factual in itself. It's basically subjective. It's not objective. By its own admission, this is all very subjective. So where do you stand in terms of that then? If something's subjective, it's just, okay, an expert opinion, but still an opinion if it's subjective, I would say. Lloyd's here. Welcome. Sharia is the Talmud of Islam. It is the final product of Muhammad's revelations. It's the full final understanding of the revelations. Thank you, Lloyd. Great to see you, Naz. Okay, early spread of Islam. On here. Some attribute the early and rapid spread of Islam to forced conversions by the sword. While it is accurate that the Muslim empire initially spread for the most part through battles and conquests, a common phenomenon for that time, the religion of Islam itself was never forced on anyone who find themselves living under Muslim rule. Is that right? Can you hear the tone of doubt in my voice? In fact, non-Muslims were afforded the right to worship as they pleased as long as a tax called jizya, which is coercive, was paid. So we're not going to force you, but we're going to give you a really high coercive tax. But we're not going to force you. Don't worry. You don't have to join our religion, but we will tax you to the hilt if you don't join our religion. Interesting. During the Dark Ages, Jews, Christians, and others were given protection by the Muslims from religious persecutions happening in Europe. Islam teaches no compulsion in religion. What's jizya then? Is that not compulsive? I would suggest it is. For more, read The Spread of Islam in the World by Thomas Arnold. I think this is, again, another example of a myth. It's not a fact. It's painting a very rosy picture of history, but I think the reality is that a lot of people down through the centuries, including in today's world, are being forced into Islam against their will in many cases. And, you know, many Muslims are being attacked and killed for trying to leave Islam as well. So there's a lot of problems with that. Sleepyhead Luke says, we won't force you, but we're going to force you. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Now, does Islam condone terrorism? See those twin towers? Interesting. The juxtaposition is hilarious. We don't use force, essentially. We never try and force people, but notice the twin towers are missing. How did that happen? Does Islam condone terrorism? Terrorism, unjustified violence. Notice the phrase unjustified violence, so therefore some violence can be justified. And the killing of non-combatant civilians and even intimidating, threatening, or injuring them are all absolutely forbidden in Islam. ISIS obviously didn't get the memo. They must be really dumb Muslims that didn't go to school and get taught the right way. Islam is a way of life that is meant to bring peace to a society, whether its people are Muslim or not, whether they want it or not, I would add. The extreme actions of those who claim to be Muslim may be a result of their ignorance. See that get out of jail point. If anyone does anything that can result in a bad image for Islam, they can just say, well, they were ignorant. The result of frustration, I wonder what type of frustration they're talking about. Uncontrolled anger, or political, not the name of or political, not religious ambitions. Okay. Anyone who condones or commits an act of terrorism in the name of Islam is simply not following Islam and is in fact violating its very tenets. Anyone have any thoughts on that one? I thought Muhammad was meant to have spread Islam through terror. These people are individuals with their own personal views and agendas. See how quickly they throw Muslims under the bus if it suits them. Fanatical Muslims are no more representative of the true teachings of Islam than fanatical Christians are of the true teachings of Christianity, or fanatical Jews are. The most prominent examples of such religious fanatics are Anders Breivik. You see that the records of that, the 2011 Norwegian terrorist Okay. Extremism and fanaticism are problems not exclusive to Muslims. Anyone who thinks that all Muslims are terrorists should note that. Well, no, I think no one is claiming that, first of all. Um, uh, Anyone who thinks that all Muslims are terrorists should note that terror groups like ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Boko Haram kill Muslims as well. Well, that's neither here nor there, is it? It's the fact that they are killing in the name of Islam. Also, the former boxer Muhammad Ali, perhaps the most celebrated person of our era, was a practicing Muslim. Again, that's a fallacy. It doesn't mean that Islam is true, does it? Any thoughts on this? Let me just turn to the chat. What about killing? Let me see. What about killing Safia's family? How about those who were killed by Ibn Walid? Christian factory worker who pulled down an Islamic poster was beaten to death and then burned. Yes, we mentioned that recently. It is prescribed to lie to protect the deen. The quickest way to get to Jannah, your reward, is by becoming a martyr, be terror or war. Yeah. A very good point by Reverend Brian Lynch. Fanatical Christians are Carthusian monks and Carmelite nuns. I know it's terrible when Christians become fanatical. They start spreading love and joy and opening orphanages and all this mean stuff like that, giving to the poor. It's a different type of extremism. Muhammad said, I've been made victorious by terror for a month's journey. Okay, Boko Haram terrorizing Christians in Nigeria, yeah, as we speak. Jihad Watch has got examples of acts committed in the name of Islam every week. And the numbers don't lie. Okay, but should add, we're not here claiming that every Muslim is a terrorist. I think that's a silly argument. But on the other hand, we can make an argument in favor of violence using the Quran if we want to, and that's the problem. Interesting point here. Right, Mel, for my Muslim son by kidnapped isn't a terrorist, just deceived. Okay, I'm not sure. Are you saying that your Muslim son was kidnapped? Not too sure what you mean. Lloyd says the differences between the four schools are on cosmetic issues that do not affect doctrine. They agree on 75% of the rulings. Okay. Okay, but it's not unanimous, I would say. And I think you could argue that it's still, if it's not unanimous, it's kind of subjective to some extent anyway. Okay, the meaning of jihad. The word jihad does not mean holy war. Again, I kind of feel that a lot of Muslims down through the centuries didn't get the memo on that one, but I grant it can mean struggle. It actually means to struggle or to strive. In a religious context, it means the struggle to successfully surrender one's will to the will of God. Some Muslims may say they are going for a jihad when fighting a war, defend themselves or others. Defend themselves and others. If you look at political Islam's video about all the different wars down through the centuries, it's hard to argue that these were all defensive battles. It's interesting if you're defending your homeland while traveling all the way to France in the, I think it was the 8th century, to fight in the cause of jihad. I don't think you could describe that as defensive. There are many other forms of jihad which are more relevant to the everyday life of Muslims, such as the struggles against laziness, arrogance, stinginess. This is all, grand, but I don't think this really amounts to much. Jihad can mean holy war. It does not, to say it doesn't mean it in every context, I'll grant you that, but it can mean. So saying it does not mean holy war is misleading, I would say. So I would give that a misleading. Regarding the so-called verses of holy war in the Quran, 2 points. The term holy war either appears in the Arabic text of the Quran nor in any classical teachings of Islam. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? The vast majority of verses in the Quran pertaining to violence refer to wartime situations to which Muslims were permitted to defend themselves against violent aggression. Well, this is an interpretation here. Where is the factual basis of this? Where's the evidence to back this up? This is an interpretation. So I would say this is hardly a fact. Any rational intellectual analysis of the context and historical circumstances surrounding each verses, and we have very little of the historical circumstances with us to be able to make that judgment, often ignored by pundits or violent extremists, proves this to be true. Other verses of violence deal with stopping oppression, capital punishment, and the like. Okay. Lloyd says the differences are reconciled by Ikhtilaf doctrine. Adherence falls between azima, strictness, and ruksha, dispensation. Azima equals the permanent violent minority. Okay. Ibn Kathir says the best kind of jihad is the type that has bloodshed. Jihad is a legal term with a defined ruling consistent across all 4 schools. Surah 929 is so clear, fight the unbelievers. Okay. So we have, on one hand, we have the Quran, and people can look at the Quran and form their own conclusions. And then you have the Sharia. And this may, as Lloyd points out, have a different understanding. The question is, the average Muslim on the street, who are they following, or what are they following? Are they following the Quran, or are they following the Sharia? I think certainly some are following the Sharia. Jihad means warfare to establish Islam. So that's the fact of the matter there. So that's helpful. Thank you, Lloyd, on that one. Okay, so let's move on. I think that the point is made. There's a lot of factual issues there. Are women oppressed in Islam? Vote now. Women are not oppressed in Islam. Any Muslim man that oppresses a woman is not following Islam. What about beating your wives? Isn't there something somewhere about that in Islamic teachings? Among the many teachings of Muhammad that protected the rights and dignity of women is his saying, the best among you are those who treat their wives well. Yeah. What's the one about you can have a sex slave, the one that your right hand possesses? It doesn't seem like it's entirely true, does it? Just having a look at the chat. Muslims are required to hide the Sharia. It is a secret. So this is part of the problem. Theodore says exactly, Mel, Christian extremists are extremely peaceful. Okay. I would think it would be very easy to make a counter argument just looking at the evidence, case after case. We could form a huge body of evidence that women in Muslim countries are not treated as well as they are in the West, for example. If we just compared like with like, I think the evidence is that women are treated as second-class citizens. They are blamed for the sins of men. And there's many things we could talk about, that they're physically threatened and so on. There's lots of things that are not great. Women, for example, in Saudi Arabia only recently got the right to drive a car. If that isn't oppressive, that they have been refused the right to drive like normal human beings, I don't know what is. Rights of women in Islam. Islam grants women many rights. Hold on a second. Islam grants women many rights. Hold on. Human beings have rights. No one grants them. We have rights by nature. You're born with rights. So Islam can only acknowledge the rights that exist there by the nature of being a human being, by birth. It doesn't grant them. So that's not good, let's say. Islam grants women many rights in the home and in society. Among them are the right to earn money. Wow, that's so generous. To financial support, to own property, to an education, to an inheritance, to being treated kindly, to vote, to a bridal gift, to keep their maiden name. Isn't that very good of them? To worship in a mosque, to divorce, and so on. We could spend an hour talking about how in each of those cases they are treated unequally in every point. Let me see. Lloyd says Dawa is defined as secondarily as a legal action. However, in its primary ruling, it's propaganda and pretense. Yeah, they can drive a car, but must have a family male with her and must have permission from the head of the house. Yeah, see all the the things that goes on here. Yeah, it's an interesting one from Rickenbacker. That means that if you treat your wife the best, then you get gold medal. If you beat your wife, you get silver medal. Gnosis Momo does not condemn the bad treatment of women. Watch the video Blasphemous Women Leaving Islam. Yeah. And what role do women have in Jannah? Yeah. And the sexy, what's it, the 72 virgins and all that. Quran says they can exchange wives. Yeah. Okay. And of course, just the fact that you're allowed to have up to 4 wives and so on. That's again, doesn't sound very good. Isn't something like 80% of the people who end up in hell women, according to Islam? Yeah. Islam owned property before Islam. Khadija was a land and business owner. Yeah, so it's a myth that somehow Islam improves their rights. Okay, let's move on. But just in that fact, we could probably find hundreds and hundreds of flaws with that. The hijab, the head covering. Muslim women wear the head covering hijab in fulfillment of God's decree to dress modestly, which doesn't seem to apply to men somehow. This type of modest dress has been worn by religious women throughout time, such as traditional Catholic nuns, Mother Teresa, and the Virgin Mary. Well, that's how Virgin Mary is depicted, certainly. But not every woman is a Catholic nun. So there's more, what's the word first? There's a more moderate term of modesty in Christianity in comparison to Islam, I would say. The other thing I think what Islam is missing is the idea of modesty in attitude. And it's almost like in Islam, Muslim men delegate responsibility onto the women, which I think is unfair. They don't take personal ownership. Saint Murad says the Quran does not know the hijab, and that's a fact. Yeah. So even that is just it's a nonsense. Muhammad's behavior towards women changed as soon as Khadija was dead. Yeah. If we accept the narrative that Islam puts forward. Culture versus religion. Okay. Forced marriages, honor killings, female genital mutilation, and the confinement of women to their homes are all forbidden in Islam. How can that possibly be true? Think about it. Where are the places that we're finding these? We don't find them in the West by and large, do we? When we think of female genital mutilation, we don't immediately think of Iceland, do we? Or do we, or countries that typically haven't had Islam? We find those always in countries where there is a Muslim population. Now, there may be instances of it in other religions that I'm not aware of, but, confinement of women to their homes, this is not something you find by and large in other religions. Honor killings, the only honor killings I've ever heard of, possibly I may, at a stretch, there might have been some that I heard in Hinduism, but by and large, the majority of them, I would say, that I've ever heard of have been in Islam. So, in any case, it's not even necessary to prove that these happen all the time, but the fact that they do occur really contradicts the idea that they're forbidden in Islam. There are leaders in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. There is a daughter of, I'm trying to think, perhaps one of you can remember, but there's a daughter of I think a Saudi family that was under house arrest. Is that possible if this is forbidden in Islam? I think this is just nonsense myself. FGM exists only in Islam. It is not a cultural thing. It's religious. Thank you, Theodore. Okay. What's this? All those Vikings, mutilators of women. Well, yeah, you kind of have to go to a really brutal people. The Vikings were pagan, obviously, but that's where you have to go to get anything similar. The culture is regressive in terms of critical thinking, the arts and science, Aquarian Riddle says. Veronica says, never heard of an honor killing that was not committed by a Muslim, at least in the West. Okay, so I think I would say that this is seriously misleading, if not out and out false. These practices stem from deeply entrenched cultural traditions. It's funny how these deeply entrenched cultural traditions only seem to occur where Islam exists and only seem to have started with the advent of Islam. It's interesting that. I don't know why. Is it just a false correlation? So it's basically cultural. It's basically blaming it on cultural traditions, even though Islam is. I thought, like earlier on, it says that Islam is basically a way of life, and yet when Islam's way of life leads to a culture where there are all of these things, it suddenly says, no, it's not Islam that's doing it, it's the culture. So there's this contradiction that's going on. And it says, and or ignorance of the true Islamic teachings or how to apply them in society. So even though Muslim societies are carrying these things out, they want to blame it on culture. Arranged marriages are allowed in Islam but are not required. Okay, depending on what country you're in. Okay, I think that's a fair point. In fact, one of the conditions for a valid Islamic marriage contract is the mutual consent of both parties to the marriage. And divorce is permissible provided the Islamic guidelines are followed, which protect the rights of all affected parties, especially women and unborn children. A Muslim man in Islam, correct me if I'm wrong, only has to say, I divorce you 3 times, and then that's official. So that contradicts this idea that it's, all the rights are protected and so on. Yeah, the no true Muslim fallacy explains it. Yeah, so the no true Muslim fallacy is trotted out every time there's anything that's embarrassing to Islam. Okay, so I think we've pretty much covered that. Let's move on. Are Islam and the Nation of Islam the same religion? Islam and the Nation of Islam are 2 different religions. Okay, Islam is a religion for all races and joins the worship of the one unseen God who never took human form. On the other hand, the Nation is a movement geared towards non-whites that teaches God appeared as a man named Fard Muhammad and that Elijah Muhammad was a prophet. According to Orthodox Islam, these are blasphemous beliefs that contradict the basic theology defined throughout the Quran and other authentic texts. The followers of the Nation adhere to some Islamic principles that are mixed with other practices and beliefs completely alien to authentic Islamic teachings. Don't have any problems with that. And in terms of its claim as a fact. To better understand the differences, read about Malcolm X, his pilgrimage to Mecca, and his later comments to the media. Islam teaches equality among the races. I do have a problem with that because you only have to look at the Islamic tradition to find plenty of examples of racism, particularly against Black people. And I'm sure some of you can post some quotations from the Hadiths just to back that up. Lloyd says, honor killing in Sharia, the following are not subject to retaliation: a father or mother or their mothers for killing their offspring or offspring's offspring. Wow. Tony Holly says it is only needs to be said once for divorce. It is only 3 times if she sleeps with someone else to return. Okay. Theodore says, well, they agree on anti-Semitism. There's no mothership in Islam, just a flying carpet and a flying barak. Interesting one. I can't say your name. C1N. Do you see what manner of spirit rules it? Yes, that's a good point. Muslims count their newborns as Muslims. They haven't said so by their free will, which proves Islam being forced on their newborns. Mo called them raisin heads. Thank you. Yes, there we have it. So it doesn't really teach equality. If you look at all of the traditions in Islam, you'll find plenty of contradictions. Just to further that point before I move away from that, if you look at an earlier video I did on Islamic art, there was a drawing that was duplicated in a later time. And what happened in the meantime was the drawing originally had black people featured in the companions of Muhammad. And then later it was whitewashed, and suddenly all the companions of Muhammad are depicted in the artwork as all white. So that would suggest that Islam is teaching racism. Certainly, if I were a black person and I were to read the traditions in Islam, if I were a black person, I should say, and Muslim, and I were to read the traditions and what it says about black people, I would not be in Islam for too long. It's very racist indeed. And look at this image here of the multicultural Islam. Islam for all people. All Muslims are not Arab, Middle Eastern, or of African descent. Islam is a universal religion and way of life that includes followers from all races. And yes, you need to speak Arabic if you want to understand the Quran properly. And even then, it's a bit of a struggle. So there's only a tiny percentage of Muslims who actually can speak the languages it's in. And there's also the issue that Islam teaches that that God sends prophets to teach the revelation in their own tongue, and yet Muhammad speaks Arabic, and so it's surely the religion is only meant to be for Arabs only. Anyway, there are Muslims in. There's a mistake here, in and from virtually every country in the world. Arabs only constitute about 20% of Muslims worldwide. The countries with the largest Muslim populations are not located in the Middle East. So yeah, that's true. They are Indonesia, over 200 million Muslims. And I think Indonesia is experiencing an exodus of Muslims at the moment. And Pakistan and India, over 350 million Muslims combined. And of course, we should point out that these countries only become Muslim in large numbers due to the conquest of those areas by Muslims. And we will be covering that history on a future date. Bala is organizing a team of experts on that, and it should be a real eye-opener. It's an area I don't know much about. Okay. Apologies if this video is becoming a bit long. Obviously, if you're watching this after the live stream, I would suggest just watch it in 30 minutes segments if it's too long for you. Okay, so the Kaaba. In the 5 daily prayers, Muslims face the Kaaba in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. It is a cube-shaped stone structure. Well, is it actually cube-shaped? It's not actually cube-shaped. It's taller than it is wide. That's not a cube. But anyway, that's a minor point. Cube-shaped stone structure that was built by Prophet Abraham. False. Abraham was never near that neck of the woods, and his son Ishmael on the same foundations where Prophet Adam is believed to have built a sanctuary for the worship of one God. In the 1600s, the Kaaba was completely rebuilt, and they dug down into the foundations because it was constantly being destroyed flooding. So they actually did dig down. So it's no longer on the foundations. Even if we accept this were true, that it's the idea that the foundations were from the time of the Prophet Adam. Well, they've got rid of those foundations back in the 1600s. So that's, assuming all the rest. So Muslims do not worship the Kaaba. It just happened to pray in that direction. It serves as a focal point for Muslims around the world, unifying them in worship and symbolizing their common belief, spiritual focus, and direction. Interestingly, the inside of the Kaaba is empty. Is it interesting? Okay, so lots of issues there. The Kaaba has been rebuilt multiple times over the century. So this structure that's there is not an original structure. The foundation is not even original. So that's the first thing. The Kaaba did not originally exist in Mecca. We've done umpteen videos where we pointed out that the Kaaba that's been referred to in the Quran is actually referring to the sacred mount in Jerusalem. And the Masjid al-Haram is really what was built by Umar in the 7th century. And so they moved it all down south. And we have looked at the water issue with Mecca as well. And we've shown that there wasn't sufficient amount of water to support a large population there. So the idea that Mecca had been a city at one time is complete myth. So that's it. There's no biblical evidence to back up the idea that Adam or Abraham or anyone else for that matter ever set foot in Mecca either. So this is just myth. It is so easy for Islam to burn and destroy their fundamental pillars. Allah gives 7 proofs. They burn them all except one. Kaaba's foundations are destroyed. Wow. Theodore says the black stone in the Kaaba is only 8 pebbles and expensive wax. And then there's the issue of touching the Yemeni corner, which washes away your sins. So many issues. Okay, so this is not a fact. Let's move on to the Hajj itself. The Hajj is an annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba made by 3 million Muslims from all corners of the earth. The earth doesn't have any corners, but this is meant to be factual. But anyway, we'll allow a term of phrase. It is performed to fulfill one of the pillars of Islam. And as I've pointed out earlier, it's only like 4%, 4.3 or something percent ever actually do the Hajj. The rituals of Hajj commemorate the struggles of Abraham. How do we know that? His wife Hagar and their son Ishmael in surrendering their wills to God. Hagar and Ishmael were sent out of Bathsheba, which is in southern Israel. And the Bible talks about them searching for water in the deserts of Sen, which is just south of Beersheba. They never traveled 1,000 miles from Beersheba to get a mug of water, did they? So this is pure and utter nonsense. You think about if they were given a bottle of water and left Beersheba, how far do you think a concubine, I should say, concubine and her son, how far do you think they managed to get with a bottle or two of water? Would you think they get all the way down to the Hijaz on foot or even with a camel? They'd pretty quickly run out of water, I would suggest. And if they were going looking for water, I think they couldn't have picked a worse place to go looking for water than way down south. Surely they would have gone way up north. It would have been far easier for them just to head north of Beersheba instead of south. Only a fool would have thought that by going to the Hijaz, that would be an ideal place to get water. Anyway, Nathan says there's no archaeological evidence in the current Mecca site or around it to support the Hajj. The hills Safa and Marwan are conveniently located in a covered building. Yes, And we've shown how Safa and Marwa actually are in Jerusalem as well in an earlier video. Okay. And the Zamzam well, which at best can only provide enough water for about 1,000 people for a limited length of time. So you couldn't possibly have a population in Mecca without an outside supply of water. I'm going to be looking at that in a later video, and how they had to build aqueducts in the beginning of the 9th century to get water into Mecca. So it's nothing to do with the Zamzam. And it was only then that Mecca got included on any maps or references to being down the Hijaz. So let me say that again. So it's only from the 9th century, according to Patricia Crona, that Mecca appears on any maps when the water supply came in. Okay, which tells its own story. Yeah, so they fill the Zamzam in Mecca every now and then. I think it's today's world. I think they just have a constant flow of water coming from Jeddah, and so they. So the funny thing is, all, if you notice, the Zamzam well is now excluded from the public eye. It's under a building, and there's pipes underneath, and been working on it a decade or two ago. So they got the piping all hooked up to the water supply that brings in the equivalent of 52 Olympic swimming pools of water every day is shipped into Mecca. Not shipped in, pumped into Mecca. I got the statistic of how many tankers of water that would be, but it's a lot. Okay, now on to the growth of Islam. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world today. Conversions are a major factor, but natural growth is the main reason. Statistically, Muslim women have the highest fertility rates in the world, which kind of might suggest that they don't have much say in it, maybe. According to the Pew Research Center, by the year 2050, Muslims will equal the number of Christians for the first time in history. Currently, the most popular name in the world is Muhammad, and perhaps most interesting is the fact that Muhammad, alternate spellings included, is the most popular name for newborn boys in England and Wales. Okay, now let's have a look at this. Is it true that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world today? Yes, today. What is the basis on it? Because relative to countries in the West, there are more women each Muslim woman on average are having more children than those in the West, which is not that difficult when you think about it, because in the West, the average fertility rate is below the replacement level. So it's below 2.1. But currently, in Muslim countries, the average is something like 2.8, just going from memory. So it's below 3. And the trend is downwards. So by the end of this decade, it's going to hit below the replacement rate, the same as everywhere else. So the trend is not good for Islam in terms of birth rates. Back in 1960, the birth rates were 4 children higher per woman. So it's dropped 4 children in that period of time. It's the fastest decrease anywhere in the world in terms of birth rates. And that should alarm the Dawa teams. So it's nothing to crow about. It's nothing to trumpet, I would suggest. Highest fertility rates in the world currently, yes. But also the fastest falling fertility rates in the world. And in terms of conversions, there's a lot of people leaving Islam. So it's those becoming Muslims are often outdone by those who are leaving Islam. If you take Iran, 50% or thereabouts no longer are Muslims. There are secret non-Muslims in Iran. In America, the apostasy rate is something like 23%. So that's, that will continue even if they get to 2.1 children on average, and below that, it'll still be 23% apostasy rate. So that's going to send the numbers off the cliff. Okay. Islam's influence on civilization. This is our last one today. Actually, I have to refer to a point. Highest numbers of deformed children due to inbreeding. That is true in places like Pakistan. The Iranian Gaman Religious Sentiment Survey doesn't augur a strong growth for Islam. Theodore says, I think that Muslims are not 1.9 billion for sure. Almost no ex-Muslims express their apostasy publicly. It's all clear signs of a cult that really needs to be exposed and dealt with, says Trinity Matrix. Okay, so our last one today, Islam's influence on civilization. Over the past 1400 years, Muslim intellects have made substantial contributions in the areas of physics, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, philosophy, and geography. Okay. Let's think about this in terms of Nobel Prize winners. What religion has got the highest number of Nobel Prize winners? I'm going to leave that question hanging. I'd like you to vote in the comment section. What religion has got the highest number of Nobel Prize winners? Let's see. Please don't say Music Mel like the British Museum. Okay, so Jews, Christianity. Let's see. Well, Christian, okay. Probably atheism. Well, if we were to do it in terms of the size of the population, okay, so the one that would actually stand out would be, yes, Veronica got it, Judaism in percentage of population, yeah. Judaism wins it hands down. Christianity, or Christian countries, that people come from a Christian country, let's say, and these could include both Christians and atheists, would come in second. And Islam does not do well. I just got distracted by a point. Roy says, what about my point, Mel, that Islam will be deported from Europe by 2050, as Giorgiani said? I can't really comment on predictions about that. I don't know really, but so the point is, okay, this is not to discount that there are Muslim intellects in the world. Certainly are. But in terms of how they do relative to the rest of the world, not great, it would be the answer. And I don't think Islam has helped. One of the things that creates intellectuals, I should say, is freedom to think critically. And Islam suppresses the freedom to think critically, and it has had a negative impact. Even given that there was a period of time when Islam was more open to reason, and the first few centuries, under the influence, I would say, of Syriac Christianity, it was still open to reason. Once the influence of Christianity in the Middle East waned, what happens? Islam suddenly becomes anti-intellectual, and that has remained the case until relatively recently. So it hasn't had too many fantastic intellectuals, really. Nobel Prize winners, not very many. If we look at all the major inventions, we find that are typically people in the West that have done that. If we think of the top 50 universities in the world, Muslim countries do not feature there. At no time, okay, so back to this. At no time was this more evident than in the Middle Ages. More evidence is, I would say, at no time was this ever evident. No, how would you say it? I would say that this is the only time it was evident, which was in the Middle Ages, a period commonly referred to as the Golden Age of Islam. It produced such luminaries as Jabir ibn Haytham, considered the father of early chemistry, Al-Khwarizmi, one of the fathers of algebra. Well, I would suggest that mathematics, where would you get that originally? I think the Indians were the fathers of algebra, or the fathers of mathematics, certainly. the Greeks as well. I think you would have to point to the Babylonians. So there's plenty long before the 7th century and the 8th century, 9th century that you could say were the fathers of mathematics just in the broad sense. But Al-Zahrawi, father of surgery; Al-Razi, father of pediatrics. So there were, I'd acknowledge there were some people who were associated, but these were a long time ago, and then the contributions dried up. Their contribution ultimately helped to usher in the European Renaissance. I think that's arguable. I think the damage that Islam did on the West economically probably held back the emergence of the Renaissance. It was because Europe was in a dark age due to its economic woes from the 7th and 8th century onwards, because of having to deal with so many battles against Muslims attacking their lands and so on. The impact of trade on the Mediterranean. There was an awful lot of piracy as a result of the advent of Islam. So, that had a massive downward impact. So I think that's arguable. This influence on Western civilization is recognized in a mural painting in the 1890s on the ceiling of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Islam is included along with England, France, America, Greece, and Rome and others in a depiction of the evolution of civilization. Well, I don't know. I would say Islam has had its share of scientists and so on, mathematicians, particularly in the early centuries. But overall, I would say if you look to China, you see that it had its fair share. It was obviously the inventor of gunpowder, paper, lots of other things. The Indians really are the origin of an awful lot of things, particularly mathematics. The Greeks had a huge contribution that they made. So I think this whole influence on civilization is mostly propaganda. It's greatly exaggerated. It's not to say that this wasn't important. It was certainly important, but it was short-lived, and it was quickly replaced by an anti-intellectualism that continued up till modern times. And as Holy Armor has just said, Persian scientists and mathematicians, not really Islamic. So you can really point to how other groups have helped Islam take the glory. Like the Christian monks contributed so much. They were living alongside Muslims, and the Muslims were taking the glory, but it was these monks that were retaining a lot of the ancient sources and so on, and the Christians were acting as was mentioned earlier, the I've forgotten the word, the administration and so on. Okay, so I think really that this is an error-ridden website. It says 30 facts about Islam. I would say these are 30 myths about Islam. I won't read this. Shall I read the summary? I think we've covered it all. I think I won't read the summary, but I think it's pretty obvious that this is a very lazy piece of propaganda. This is really a condensed form of the Islamic script, the Dawah script. It is factually incorrect in so many ways. And I would suggest that if Muslims want to find out the facts, really, I think they should have a look at this video. I think, and also have a look at the comments underneath this video, because I'm sure there will be many viewers who will add counter information against what is supposed to be a fact. Obviously, this is just a very quick overview in 2 hours or so, or is it 3 hours? Oh my goodness, 3 hours. But On that point, I'm going to stop here. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.